Mr. Jordan Dittloff is joining us live this morning. Jordan, you are the lead Libertarian Senate candidate for Victoria and someone who is pro-Bitcoin. We've seen major gaslighting the world over when it comes to mathematically sound money. How do you believe a pro-Bitcoin regulatory environment would benefit the Australian economy and public? What part do politics really have to play here?
Well, I think that the only part politics has to play is to get out of the way. To be completely honest with you. And I think that when it comes to the way governments and fiat sort of regulatory monopolies view Bitcoin, I think it all comes down to one word, and that's competition. And government doesn't like competition, and it doesn't like the ability of people to sidestep or avoid what is essentially a rigged casino. And we've seen that time and again. Government, of course, loves the ability to manipulate currency. It's the single largest beneficiary of fractional reserve banking and quantitative easing. If you're the biggest debt holder in the world, which is government, then devaluing currency so that your debt and hence interest repayments and so forth are worth less, then that's a big win for you. You have no downside. But obviously the common people suffer, and inflation is an entirely monetary phenomenon. And I should caveat at the beginning by saying that I'm very much... I know many terrific Bitcoiners. I don't hold any Bitcoin yet myself, and I'll have to confess that in a lot of ways, I'm still very much at the beginning of my learning journey about Bitcoin. But, what I do know is that it's fundamentally about individual sovereignty, self-custody, and fundamentally it's about mutually beneficial exchange and people being able to hold a store of value and have an alternative medium of exchange that is sort of outside the government's control and ability to manipulate. And if that's all I know, I'm in.
Yeah. I guess the biggest takeaway is a little bit of homework here. Jordan, Beers for Bitcoin, written by Seb Bunny and Daz B. Absolutely amazing book. It's this thick. It'll take you 6 to 8 hours to read maximum and get off zero. And I guess the biggest thing...
I'm actually meeting with Daz B and a number of other prominent Bitcoiners on Sunday to do a bit of a policy roundtable where they're going to be giving me the good oil and sort of setting me on the right path. So it sounds like I'm on the right track.
100%. Daz and the book and the people that you are meeting with, really incredible. They'll definitely steer you in the right direction. If anyone can, it'll be that group of people that you are meeting up with. I guess before we dive too deep into the conversation, like I said, my faith in the political system, it really doesn't exist. I believe in being self-sovereign, taking 100% self-responsibility. I don't think the system's here to save anyone, to be able to help anyone. Like you're saying, the central bank, even though Australia, the Commonwealth of Australia, owns the central bank here, it's a rigged system. They just print as much money, they debase the currency, it causes inflation, hardship for everyone. They just destroy people's time because we all exchange our time for money. They inflate the money away. They're stealing our life from us. What principles and policies does the Libertarian Party stand on? How are they different, or is it the same stuff all over again?
No, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that phenomenon you've described of feeling as though your time is being stolen from you, that truly is the best way to explain inflation. Because if Australians, and I'm guessing most of your listeners and viewers are obviously people who have had this realization or awakening already, but there are a lot of Australians out there who still don't have a name for the question that is on the tip of their tongues or just on the edge of their mind. And I know it sounds a bit matrixy to sort of say, but it is. It's like a splinter in the mind, that nagging unease and sense that we're working harder for less than we ever have been before. And it's actually true. And everything the government does is trying to prevent you from making that realization and trying to normalize what is a fundamentally abnormal, abhorrent sort of phenomenon. So I think that's the first thing to sort of acknowledge, is to say that, yes, you are right. That is the effect of the system, and it is horrific and unnatural, and it should be opposed. And the Libertarian Party do oppose it. Out of all political parties, we are the only party who say the system isn't something that can be run better, or the levers of power sort of manipulated in a different way by good people with good intentions and have a different outcome. No, we say that the system itself is fundamentally broken. And so we are the only party in the Australian political scene who don't believe that government can ever be a force for good. And that flows through. So our principles are the principles of, far, far smaller government than we have now, of individual responsibility, and of the notion that you, as an individual, are the best placed person to make decisions for your own life and for the people you care about. And all of our policies flow from those very simple, very clear principles. If you only knew the principles of libertarianism, you would be able to extrapolate our policy positions in each respect from those principles. We will never vote for an increase in taxes. We'll never vote for a decrease in individual liberties. And that's just something that no other politician, no other political party can say that. One Nation sometimes are on the side of free speech and, on the side of anti-woke and, anti sort of reckless renewables and all those sorts of things. And that's great. And they're fellow travelers with us in that we share those positions at the moment, but they don't have any fundamental principled basis that you can extrapolate to new things and situations. In terms of what are the Libertarian Party's policies right now on Bitcoin, our party's policy position is that we believe that Bitcoin should be treated like any other currency. We shouldn't be charging capital gains tax on Bitcoin any more than we charge capital gains tax on foreign exchange movements, purchase of US dollar, fluctuations in normal currency prices. Essentially, governments treating Bitcoin as an asset is just plainly wrong. It's a legal fiction, and what it has the effect of doing is more or less incentivizing people who have Bitcoin to hold it, to try to shield it from the eyes of the government and not to spend and use it. And so it's sort of like a shadow ban in some ways of Bitcoin, where you're penalized for trying to move outside the current system.
Yeah. So within the system, being like a minor party, what can you do for the Bitcoin community? Like, how much power does the Libertarian, even if they're not the lead party here in Australia, with regulation laws like your right to run, the right to be able to self-custody, how can your party implement things that may help within that?
Well, I think the biggest thing that can help is awareness and advocacy. And, if you had, as I hope to be, a sitting Libertarian senator talking about Bitcoin, talking about the Fed Ponzi, talking about all of the things that the Bitcoin community have been crying from the rooftops for as long as I've been paying attention to politics, I think that in itself would make an immense difference to the way that the issue is discussed, certainly by the mainstream media, and it might prompt more people to go out and start asking some questions. And I think that's invaluable in itself. I think Bitcoin is far more mainstream and far more on the sort of radar of the public. You've obviously seen, even though we have big issues with BlackRock, they're a bit of an evil sort of corporation. The fact that BlackRock have taken massive holdings of Bitcoin really is a shift, I think, and a signal that times are starting to change. Yeah. But you want to make sure that when that shift does happen, it's not co-opted by bad actors to destroy the very thing you're trying to promote or trying to facilitate, which I think that sort of regulatory capture and systemic resistance is very much a feature of government and of, I would say, the deep state, which includes the sort of corporate state collusion. So I was going to ask, actually, you've said a couple of times, and this is a bit of a random aside. You've said "say again" a number of times. Do you have a military background at all?
No, I don't. But both my papa and my grandparents do. But from flying, potentially, that's where.
Oh, there you go. So you're a pilot, or were a pilot?
Yeah. Just recreational, just for fun, private pilot's license, and. Haven't been flying for a little while. Side note, real quick, we'll get back to the Bitcoin signal in 2 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. But went to buy a plane 4 years ago, put that money into Bitcoin. I've gone to buy a plane several times over, and we've got this opportunity. Bitcoin's so cheap; it's at 65,000 US. $1,000 US today, about $100,000 Australian, and like with everything that we're talking about, the toys, the fun, everything, all that can come later. Like, it's there, it's waiting, that's great. But the financial system really is on the brink of absolute, total, catastrophic collapse. And if people aren't really waking up now, before we went live, you're saying, like, it feels like we're about to go over a cliff, or we are already over a cliff. Like, I don't think it's fear mongering. It's not there to disempower people. It's just to be able to bring awareness that these things are happening. We are moving in a certain direction. And we've got an opportunity right now to be able to make a change within our own lives. We can buy, stack and chill with Bitcoin, hold in self-custody, and hedge ourselves against inflation, allow our purchasing power to be able to go up, which gives us our time back. Or we continue to go down this path. A little bit of a quick pivot. What's on nuclear? Like, if I just bring this up here, we've got 7 nuclear plants operating from 2035 under a coalition plan, and then you can see here, nuclear is economic insanity, the financial review. The gaslighting in regards to nuclear is a technology. It's very safe, effective technology. Why has it turned into a political issue? And do you know if there's an agenda behind it, or what are your thoughts just in regards to nuclear for Australia?
Yeah, so I said to you before we started, and I'll sort of reset it for the benefit of your listeners, I think the surest way to make sure nuclear does fail and is massively overpriced and massively under-delivers on its potential is to put government in charge of delivering it. I think, if we look at the NBN, and your internet's kind of on my end, I don't know if it is for everyone, but a bit of a proof of this, the NBN is a white elephant that should never have been built by the government. If we had waited 10 years, we would have had private actors like Starlink and Elon Musk innovating and completely making the copper network, fast copper network, redundant. The same thing will happen with nuclear if the coalition or if any other government is in charge of building it. I support nuclear as technology. I think it's got a terrific opportunity in Australia. We're an energy-rich and resource-rich nation. We've got energy abundance. There's no reason why we should be paying the power prices we're paying now. And I think that nuclear obviously has big startup capital investment costs, but those costs quickly get paid back by the long-term running costs and efficiencies. And so I support nuclear energy, but the Libertarian Party position is no bans, no subsidies. And that is, it sounds like a simple sweeping slogan, but it really solves all things, because, you remove the government, because the lobby group that is the renewable energy sector and the legacy energy sector is just huge. And, what you've seen companies like AGL, companies like Rio Tinto, et cetera, they have co-opted renewables. They've just moved into that. If you think renewables is being operated by some, rival environmentally friendly group, it's just new branding on old faces. And so there's these huge vested interests that have managed to extract taxpayer money, your money, your and my money, subsidies, to offset and facilitate their business model in renewables and completely distort the energy market and deliver unstable, expensive power for Australians. And, there was recently a story the ABC ran where they said, we went out and asked the industry, was nuclear viable? And unsurprisingly, when they asked the existing established players in the energy industry whether a disruptive technology competitor was going to be viable, they said no. How amazing is that? I would never have predicted that these people would have a vested interest in sort of trying to see off a competitor. So, look, I think we've been advocating for the opportunity for the nuclear energy market to thrive for 20 years. It's great the coalition's finally caught up to us, but predictably, they've kind of jumped the shark and taken it further, and they want government to be in the driver's seat. And if you look at the Snowy Hydro, you've got, the boring machine that's stuck in, 4 meters of water. And, One Nation did a great cartoon on Please Explain on that. The borer's name, I can't remember what the stupid drill's name is, but anything government touches, it's like the reverse Midas, it just turns from gold into copper. So I think that it would be great if the outcome of this political debate about nuclear was that the coalition won, or made strong headway on a pro-nuclear platform. But then if the market forces were allowed to implement that would be the libertarian dream.
Yeah, being a very socialist country, we've been programmed through misinformation and propaganda that big government's good, having the decisions from governments made for us, and for Big Brother to be able to look after us is just the way it is. It's what we've grown up with here in Australia. And so that system, it's become toxic, it's corrupted, it's too big. How can you tone it down if it's already established the way it is? How can you change the existing system, have a smaller government, and take the incentives back onto the free market for people? How's it even possible?
Yeah, and so you said before we began you didn't know anything about politics. You know plenty about politics. I think you need to pause your knowledge level about politics right there, and you don't need any more. I think that what we need really is a political revolution in this country. Perhaps unfortunately, libertarians believe in the non-aggression principle and the non-harm principle, so it's got to be a peaceful revolution. But we really can't fix this system. We need branch and root reform, and we need to start, I think, and you asked me earlier what could a libertarian influence do, and what could Victoria's our most winnable Senate spot, and hopefully if I'm elected I'll be joined by other libertarian senators, but it's possible I would be a sole senator on the crossbench for the Libertarian Party. And what I think that a sole libertarian voice in the Senate and pro-Bitcoin voice in the Senate could do is really expose the systemic nature of Canberra and of the current political system, which I think is difficult for most people to perceive. There's that old parable about asking three blind men to describe what an elephant looks like, and each of them touches a different part of the elephant and has a completely different description of what an elephant looks like. And I think that most Australian voters and Australian citizens are in that position where they just can't see or comprehend the sheer scale, waste, and vested interest nature of the system we have. They sort of know that politicians do dodgy things and that the system's broken, but they sort of think those things are sort of the exception rather than the actual intended effect of the system. And so I think that what I hope to do if I'm elected is really shine a spotlight on Canberra as an outsider, as somebody who's not co-opted by the system. And I know a lot of politicians say that, but if you after this interview, if you want to go and have a look at a little bit more about me and my sort of track record and interviews I've done, I'm someone who has no problem at all being in the minority or being sort of in the wilderness on the outside of something. In fact, I kind of prefer it, and I really look forward to. I'm sure I'll be horrified. Based on what I know now, I'm deeply concerned, suspicious, and cynical. I'm certain that if I'm elected to Parliament and I'm a senator sitting in Canberra, I will be absolutely horrified by what I actually find under the log. So that's my answer. I think we need to begin with, at a minimum, drastically winding back the nanny state. We've got a government now that really, at its height in COVID, took responsibility for life and death. That was what citizens wanted government to do. They wanted them to protect them from all harm up to and including death. They deified the state. And that didn't go away after COVID. That power remains. The state saw what it could do, not just what it could get away with, what it was begged to do, asked to do by the vast majority of Australian citizens. And if we think that they won't sort of take that lesson and run with it, I think we'd be very, very foolish.
Yep. Can you shine any light on this digital ID bill that passed about a month ago here in Australia, what your thoughts are, and if that has anything to do with CBDCs that Australia is researching building out?
Yeah, I think that the two things are definitely will be connected. And one of the things that the system relies on is the fact that every small change seems like a small, potentially justifiable change in isolation. And then when you actually look at it over, 5-year or even 10-year sort of window, suddenly it all seems to link together in a way that is just never made explicit. And that's intentional. They don't bring everything in at once and say what the overall effect of the system is going to be. They just have little toothing stones that leave changes for the next. And I think that if you have a piece of legislation, which the digital ID bill says, that has a specific section that says this regime is voluntary, I don't think any like the default is voluntary, right? If you need to put that something's voluntary in a system, and you need to be so sort of keen to reassure people of its voluntary nature, it's a little bit like the countries that have democratic and republic in the name, usually the sketchy, juntas and banana republics. But basically, the digital ID system will be voluntary in the way that internet banking is voluntary, or in the way that the internet is voluntary. Nobody's putting a gun to your head and forcing you to use things that are incredibly convenient and everywhere. But if you didn't use them, you'd be opting out of a lot of convenience and the way the system is pretty much geared to funnel people. And the digital ID bill, I think, and we can see this very quickly, or I'll give you an example. They brought in this digital ID that said it's completely voluntary. Now they're saying you need age restrictions on social media for kids. That basically to use social media, you're going to have to verify your age. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, maybe there's this really convenient digital ID that we've already got set up ready to go that all users of social media, in order to prove they're not under 16, because people think it's about kids. It's not about kids. It's about every system. And so it's not like you can have a regime just for the people you're targeting. You have to build the system to exclude people under 16. And for kids who are under 16, you're also training them to provide verification to use the internet. You're adding a barrier to what was previously a free digital town square. So essentially, these things absolutely will be connected. I think that I'm really concerned because, like we've talked already about the ability and indeed the, almost inevitability of government to manipulate and distort the fiat currency system. One of the few actual restrictions that's just a logistical restriction is the fact that they actually have to print money. So the physical, even though it's not much of a restriction, it doesn't stop them from doing much, but it is at least slightly physically inconvenient, and they actually have to physically print money to distort the fiat currency system at the moment. Under a CBDC system, that last remaining sort of logistical barrier disappears, and they can essentially just make up whatever they want, and the currency can be valued whatever they want, and it's also programmable. So they'll be able to actually, it's like the anti-Bitcoin, right? It's like the inverse, where it's basically all of the things that make Bitcoin attractive, in that it's secure, it's confidential and private inherently, it's impossible to manipulate, it's got that built into its DNA. A CBDC is almost like a macabre sort of caricature shadow image, where they want people to perceive the convenience and the benefits, but they want to actually build in all these back doors and almost even front doors to sort of, be in a position where, if you're somebody who's being inconvenient or not doing something or getting something or, in some way defying the government, it's almost impossible to imagine a scenario where they wouldn't weaponize a digital currency that's government endorsed.
Yeah, 100%.
Also, sorry, I should say, at the same time also, I can see a very real likelihood that if the government gets into the digital currency business, Bitcoin will suddenly go from being sort of a second or third tier priority of something that they want to sort of disincentivize and kind of tax and punish a little bit, but they're not really going to go hard after Bitcoin and holders of Bitcoin. But if you suddenly have the government moving into a space where they are directly competing with Bitcoin, as they would see it, you watch what happens. And I think I can see on the horizon really significant changes and crackdowns. If the government gets into digital currency, they'll be trying to smash digital competitors.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I think that's why the last 4 years have gone so hard to be able to get as much Bitcoin as possible and be able to hold them to self-custody. And I can very easily see it getting a lot worse before it gets better. However long that time frame is, truth will always prevail. You have people like yourself bringing awareness to the political side, and people like myself or the authors bringing it down to the general public's viewpoint. There will be a shifting point. Like, they can only put so much pressure on the human spirit, the human population, before they wake up and realize and push back. And there is more of us than them. But short term, I think they're going to keep marching down there. So I guess a big takeaway for everyone is hold Bitcoin in self-custody. I would like just to bring up today's sponsor, The Bitcoin Way. Tony used to work for Steve Jobs at Apple, 25 years cybersecurity experience. They can just help you lock it down, make you become an unconfiscatable, sovereign individual, run your own node. They've got a 3 steps to freedom. And if things get too crazy here, they can help you get a second passport and move somewhere that will treat you with respect. When they come out, and the first 30 minutes is free, link at the top of the description. But when governments come out with these bills like digital IDs or CBDCs, once they're already there, like, is there anything, like I signed a petition to be able to get rid of the digital ID. Like, I don't know what good that does. How can these evil, sadistic policies that they bring in, how can they be removed again once they're already been passed into law?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm looking at the some of the comments as well in your stream, and it's great to see so many people up and enthusiastic early listening to us talk. And I actually agree with a comment I can see there that, you know, someone said Bitcoin doesn't need politicians. Eventually, politicians will realize they need Bitcoin, and I think that's a great comment. And I think that what we have to understand about the political machine and politicians is they are very, very slow to pick up on trends. And it's like a tail, it's like a lag. By the time politicians are aware of things or things become acceptable or legislated, it's almost like 10 years has passed in between something being current and legislation and parliament catching up with it. But to answer your question, I think that sometimes things that government does get used by political actors as like rage bait to sort of get people engaged, get people's information, sort of build their own profile and following without actually really trying to wind back the beast. And another comment that was in your comment section before was about even a 1 to 1.5% reduction in the size of government would be an immense, like, people just don't understand the actual scale and entrenchment of this machine. Yeah. And I do think that, as I said earlier, the Libertarian Party is really the only party that's committed to that project. Both major parties are both now bipartisanly in support of digital censorship, massive tax and spend, mainly tax, and also increasing the size of government. There really has not been a political party that is committed to reducing the size of government. Not just, like I said, not just the faces at the top or who's in charge or how things are being implemented. And so in the long run, a Libertarian Party, and the reason I know this is 2 recent examples in the world, one close to home, one a little bit further from home. As many of you would have seen, Argentina just elected a Libertarian president, Javier Milei. He's in the process of really, like, he passed a bill last week. The Argentinian Senate passed it 36 to 37 in favor. He's basically going to be massively decreasing the size of the public service, reining in spending, introducing tax reforms. You've got another very pro-Bitcoin regime in El Salvador, I believe, where I think it's actually accepted as one of the national currencies.
It's legal tender.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've got examples in South America of libertarian leaders and policies being the only way to really turn back the tide. But closer to home, and I think that shows kind of the pathway for our party and what this project is all about, if Bitcoiners get behind the Libertarian Party. The ACT Party in New Zealand is a minor party that's a libertarian-inspired party as well. It's the Alliance of Consumers and Taxpayers is what it stands for. And they recently have actually been made a junior coalition partner because the main Liberal Party equivalent, the Nationals in New Zealand, needed a smaller party to actually gain government. And so this ACT Party, who's like a sort of libertarian cousins over in New Zealand, they actually are a junior coalition. Like, they hold cabinet spots and they are a necessary part of this government. And they've basically been able to wind back a whole heap of damage in terms of regulations, in terms of the woke agenda. They've been able to get rid of, essentially discriminatory bodies that are sort of trying to prioritize certain cohorts of people and sort of try to impose a caste system on New Zealand. They've been able to wind all that back really rapidly. Like, the New Zealand election was a little bit under 12 months ago, I think, and they've just made massive strides already. So we don't need a lot more momentum than we have now to get to a point where we can make really outsized change.
Yeah. And how, like, what are your thoughts on the woke agenda? What's the point behind it? It doesn't feel like it's empowering. Definitely allow everyone to be able to choose to be and think whatever they want. But the agenda itself, it feels like it's a distortion on the truth. Like, we saw what kindergarten kids are being taught. They should be playing in the sand. Like, what's your stance on that?
Yeah. So you might have seen, I can hear you might be referencing what I shared yesterday on Twitter. The IPA, who do great work. They're not right on everything, but they're pretty good with a lot of things. They did a report that showed that now this early learning framework, or early young learners framework, the 0 to 5-year-olds in daycare and what would have once been childcare, is basically promoting diversity, equity, inclusion. There's 0 mention of mother, 0 mention of father, 9 mentions of parents, 0 mentions of family. So this ideology, this woke mind virus, as Elon Musk calls it, I think that's the best way to think about it, is just sort of like steadily trying to worm its way ever deeper. And family is the last bastion of individual sovereignty that the state really would love to get in and distort and disrupt. And you ask, like, what's the point of it? And I think that to understand the point of it, you have to look at what the outcome is, which is powerless, frustrated victim people. And that's what the system's trying to generate. If you believe that all of the problems in the world are a result of systemic inequality and, you know, tension and conflict between all these different intersectionalist groups, then your ability to improve and change your life and the society around you is 0.
Yeah.
In order for you to improve your life, if you're an adherent of that ideology, then you must be an oppressed person fighting against a system. How do you fight against the system? You have to trust this sort of elite caste of people who are kind of selling you snake oil. So essentially, it's the antithesis of individual agency, of taking responsibility for your own life, of improving your circumstances. You know, and one thing, an example I like to give, and it's relevant when I'm sort of engaging with a new cohort of people like I am here with Bitcoin. So I actually have an experience in my life of struggling with drug and alcohol addiction. So in my 20s, I really, as a young man, had a lot of difficulties with those things. And I also had a small business that failed. And so I basically had some criminal sort of offending that stemmed from those things. And that led to time I served in prison. So that was probably a bit of an unusual sort of pathway to being at the beginning of my legal career and running for the Senate. But it's something that happened in my life. And the easiest thing in the world under this sort of woke intersectionalist ideology, and something that happens, like, they actually say, if you're a prisoner or if you're someone who's harmed other people, you are a victim. That's what they say. That's what this ideology sort of tries to do. And it basically says, you, therefore, can't improve your own life. You need to basically just be oppressed and angry, and it's okay if you don't do anything and take any steps to improve your life and change your position. And it's the most toxic, disempowering, harmful ideology you can imagine, because for all of human history, or as long as we can remember recorded human history, people valued the hero's journey, the ordeal. You know, the classics talked about an individual triumphing and moving through adversity and hardship and becoming a better person at the end of it. But that sort of celebration of the individual journey of learning and growth and the hero's journey is just like absolute heresy to these people. They can't abide it because it removes power from their view of the world, basically.
Yeah, I've actually got The Hero's Journey behind me on the bookshelf. It's a highly recommended read for everyone out there. It's imperative, I think, and very much aligns with Bitcoin. Diving into drug addiction, I also suffered with drug addiction about the same time, very similar, just hearing briefly about your story. And may I ask personally, and feel free not to go into it, are your parents still together, or was it a split home that, like, very often that leads into drug addiction, or was it the system that failed you and you didn't feel like there was another option? What led you down that path?
Well, I think again, kind of like applying that that sense of ownership and stuff like that. If I'm honest, I think my parents are still together. You know, they're like not every relationship's what it is. You know, they're not perfect, but mum and dad are still together. And I had a very kind of happy, stable upbringing. I think for me, the kind of root cause of my struggles with drug and alcohol addiction, I should say, I'm now in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be 9 years in recovery, so I don't drink or use anything. Sort of not surprisingly, my life has been amazing since that point. The last 9 years have been incredible.
Yeah.
But I think the kind of root of my struggles with addiction really came from within and sort of emanated from my inability to deal with life on life's terms. And you know, so I was somebody who, just really, I think I was probably hypersensitive to the world and the world's struggles, you know, and that is a strength. That's a strength in many ways. And I can see the same thing in you. You know, you feel passionately about the world. You could just sort of bunker down and hold your Bitcoin and sort of, you know, look after yourself. But you obviously are somebody who, like me, is motivated and passionate to help other people. And that the double-edged sword of that is that when you're young and you're so keenly aware and sensitive of what's going on in the world, it can be overwhelming, and it can sort of like make you sort of turn to other things to try to deaden and sort of dull and switch off, you know, which other people are able to do perhaps a lot more easily or readily, you know. And so today I sort of still have those tendencies, and I'm still someone who's very intense and very hyper-focused and very driven, but I sort of try to channel those tendencies in positive directions. So
yep. So you went through that journey as things internal. You got put into the system called you a victim. What was the step, like, what steps did you follow? Was it NAAA putting in a 12-step program, or what allowed you to rise up above that and then take 100% self-responsibility? Because that relates to Bitcoin, that relates to having a good life, that relates to absolutely everything. What was that journey for you like?
Yeah, so I did and remain in touch with my sponsor and stuff. Like, life's busy. I don't always get to meetings as often as I'd like to, but I definitely drew a lot of support and comfort from the 12-step fellowships. And I think also, I mentioned before we started, so I remember the first day after I got out of prison, my mate put on Jocko Willink's podcast. He's got a podcast, Leadership and Discipline. And he sounds like a bit of a sort of really typical sort of gronky, you know, ex-Navy SEAL, whatever. When you first hear him, the way he talks is very sort of basic, but then he's just incredibly switched on, intelligent, wise person who's learned about discipline, self-discipline and leadership. And I think the biggest realization for me, and this is probably relevant to the journeys of a lot of people like you're talking about, was realizing that I was basically, through lack of self-discipline, I was seeking out highly structured environments like prison, like the military, like, you know, I needed the world to organize me rather than organizing myself. So I think just that idea of extreme ownership, of self-governance, of imposing order freely and without coercion. And that's what I think like libertarianism is all about, is basically saying, if the government stopped existing tomorrow, the world as we know it, I believe, fundamentally would continue much the same as it already is, because most people would continue to freely assume obligations that the government says you need it to enforce. And yes, there would be people who would do the wrong thing. I think most people in government who argue the hardest against free will are the people who would do the worst things, because they impose their own fears and their own nature on the world, and they think that everybody would be a horrible person if left free to do so. And that, I think, tells you more about people that like regulations and push for regulations than it does about the people who would be just fine without them. But yeah, I think that idea of you don't get to choose what happens to you and the circumstances around you, but you get to choose how you respond to them, always. That's always the choice you have. And I think once you realize that, it's then a question of, you know, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? And it just opens up this whole world of being able to, take charge of your destiny and take charge of your story.
Yeah, just I want to push back on one thing there, but just for everyone, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Williams makes a incredible audio book, because he does it in his own voice, and you can really dive into his mind. So I'm all for reading the books, but it's a really good one to be able to listen to. The pushback there, Jordan, is if government was to disappear overnight, things wouldn't be the same. They'd get better straight away.
Yes,
100%.
I'll take that pushback. I will take that pushback.
And I think
I'm so used to sort of trying to explain to people that the sky wouldn't fall in, because I think the biggest myth or the biggest lie perpetuated by the state and the system is that it is the bastion between order and anarchy. But the reality is human beings organise themselves just fine for all of human history before the modern nation state came along, which is a relatively new creature. People don't sort of appreciate how recent, that the Treaty of Westphalia was in, I think, early 1800s. And like before then, the idea of this centralised nation state that did everything and controlled every aspect of your life was just unheard of. And believe it or not, things were still pretty good, and the world functioned.
Yeah. And we can see it in our day-to-day lives. You go to the shopping centre, you're at the checkout, you line up, nobody's punching each other, nobody's spitting on each other, nobody's antagonistic towards each other. People just do the right thing out of respect for people. We've got a couple of minutes here left, Jordan. It's really good to hear that you are catching up with Daz B later on this week, as well as the other people. I won't dox them here on the show, but I really look forward to hearing what comes of that. What thoughts, ideas would you like to share with, we've got both an Australian and a worldwide audience. It's a 50-50 split here. But in regards to government, in regards to freedom, self-responsibility, sovereignty, what message would you have for everyone? Yeah,
well, I think the message I'd want to finish on, and I suppose I would say this because I'm participating in trying to bring about change, but I think that what I've encountered in the Libertarian community, and the Bitcoin community might be a bit like this too, potentially, I'm still learning, is that some people take a bit of a let the world burn approach, and they say, let's just sit back and wait it out. And, let's what's the point in trying to participate, because you'll only essentially have to compromise and get co-opted. So there's a real sort of there's a real sense of I suppose purity versus progress. That's sometimes something I encounter in libertarian circles a lot. And all I would say is that you guys are so well positioned to influence and make such a positive impact, and things are closer to change than we realize. Always, the system always looks like it will always be the way it is until the moment of change. It'll seem unassailable, and we've seen that. You just look at recent history through dictatorial regimes in the Middle East. They look like they are incredibly strong, resilient things, and then all it takes is that tipping point, and then suddenly people see systems for the paper tigers they are. So I suppose I'd finish on that note of optimism and hope. I'd also say for everyone watching this either now or later, keep reaching out to me. The Bitcoin community has been amazing. I wish every area of policy was filled with as many people who want to point you in the right direction as Bitcoin, because it's really like the people that I'm going to be meeting up with on Sunday were basically like all referred to me 3 or 4 times within about 24 hours of me posting about Bitcoin. So the community you have is awesome, and you guys have a really clear idea of yourself, your interests, and what needs to happen. And I'm really looking forward to helping achieve progress in this area.
Yeah. As I leave you here, Jordan, it's been an absolute pleasure. I would ask that you do read Beers for Bitcoin straight after that, The Bitcoin Standard by Saif Dean and Moose. Get Off Zero, you can clearly see the problems. And then in regards to Bitcoiners, their best community, and we may not always get everything right, but we are relentlessly, ruthlessly pursuing truth and what is base reality. How can we as individuals and collectively lead the best life? So I am grateful that you are who you are. You've got integrity. You're very open. You're very willing to share what your flaws are, what you do and don't know, and you're open to learning, and you're not here to protect the status quo, but to be able to change things. So truly appreciate your time and look forward to having you back on once you get off zero, mate.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, mate. And look,